What's going on, everybody? This is the blockchain backer, bringing you the latest cryptocurrency news and analysis. Today, we're going to be talking about the Bitcoin price chart in culmination with the altcoin market and the stock market, and whether or not Bitcoin can set a new all-time high during its next turn up, whenever that may come. I think this is a very controversial topic, and when approaching this type of topic, I try not to come from any type of tribalistic view or any type of personal views towards Bitcoin, whether I love Bitcoin, whether I don't like Bitcoin. I try to keep all of that out of it and just merely stick to data and data alone. You know, the fun thing about markets and charts for me is really trying to solve the puzzle that somehow, some way, these charts give us insights into what can happen with price action in the future. It's not always perfect, but many times it hits it right on the button. One of those things would have been the Bitcoin market cap, anticipating a 4.236 extension, and it just so happens the whole world changes after we get there. But after nearly a year of downward action, the question remains, what's the next move on Bitcoin? Is it to head back into retracement levels and that's it? Or is it to go off into new all-time highs? And there's many thoughts on this topic, whether it pertains to the Bitcoin block reward halving or whether it comes to the stock market. And I'm in no way here to attack anyone's personal beliefs or their theories on the markets. I'm really just going to provide data and my thoughts on it, and you can decide what you think of that on your own. Now, one of the most important charts to me is the Dow Jones Industrial Average. The depths at which we have fallen over here on the Dow Jones Industrial Average are consistent with what has happened after we've already gone on to do 5 full waves for a parabolic ending in a bubble, and that a bubble has popped by us taking out the February of 2020 height, with this dip that we've had for the last couple of weeks, closing weeks below that 200-week moving average over there for the Dow Jones. An example of this that I've pointed to was Ethereum's ending phase during the 2017 bull run, in which it had a double tap on top of its all-time high with a bull flag, breakout, and a violent backtest V-bottom to go on for its final ending, which was the same as which we had over here on the Dow Jones with our bull flag, our breakout, our violent backtest breaking out to the height. And as we have now broken below the February of 2020 height, it rules out a wave 4. If you were to say this is wave 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, well, we have Elliott wave problems happening in here, and that this is looking much more consistent than that of one which the top is already in. Now, just because the top is already in, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to go crumbling down on itself like it did in the 1930s. Anything is possible. If we are entering the big bear market for the Dow Jones and it has already completed a full bubble, anything is possible in bear markets on how they can move down if liquidations start happening. But if we go from a structured format of what typically happens in pops, is that we can see that there's usually some type of retracement, and then you just move down over the course of a long period of time. Everybody likes to think of crashes happening in the phase of we just go straight down, lights out, game over. And sometimes that does happen, like we saw over there with Netflix. But will that actually happen with the US stock market? My best guess is no, that it would be a little bit slower than that. But that I do think we have seen the peak of the Dow Jones now that we've taken out the February of 2020 height. But as we could see in here, it doesn't mean that just because we take out that level, we don't get a violent bounce right back out of there at some point, bouncing way back up, right? It just means that the actual bubble has already popped. It's definitely not something that I want. I'm not a fear monger. I'm not the type of person who loves to just scream the end of times are coming and Bitcoin and gold and silver are going to save us all from this moment. That's not who I am. I would much rather markets just keep going up for forever. Okay. I don't like the idea of seeing this happen in here because I envision what will the next 20 years look like, right? I imagine what does 20 years look like from now? Not good. So it brings me no joy or fun to sit here and say, hey, that looks like that was the top right in there. But I have to accept the data for what it is because that's just what I try to do. So if we assume that that's true, if we assume that this was the top of the US stock market, we have now completed all of our final waves up in here. And let's bring back that chart as well that we were just looking at and zoom out on that one too. I've pointed this out as well before, that if you look at this from a much longer perspective, that you could see These are the same as well. That we have reached our final ending in here. Here's your double tap on top of your all-time high, double tap, and then your violent back test, and then your new all-time high. There's your violent back test and your new all-time high. That it's confluent with what happens at the very end, and these things go on. So it brings me no joy to talk about something like that. It's not cool. It's going to probably stink years from now. But does it mean we're going there right now? And what does that mean for Bitcoin in that circumstance? There's a lot of different opinions out there, and I'll let everybody make their own opinion on that. More than welcome to. But I think there's this big discussion and argument back and forth on whether or not it's the Bitcoin block reward halving or whether it's the stock market that actually sends Bitcoin into these new all-time highs, and the timing of them happening around every 4 years. That the bull runs happen, the timing of every 4 years for the block reward halving. Is it the stock market that's causing that to happen? Or is it the Bitcoin block reward halving that's causing it to happen? And so in this video, I'm going to present the case that it is the stock market that's causing it to happen. And we're going to dissect it much closer to show that. And then that's going to present the question of whether or not is Bitcoin going to set another new all-time high, or is Bitcoin just going to go into a retracement? And the way we're going to do this is we're going to overlay the Brave New Coin Liquid Index, which will give us data all the way back to 2010 for Bitcoin. And we're going to look at the Dow Jones at the same time to see the price action of these two occurring, to see when Bitcoin breaks out into its new all-time highs. And so if we check out the 2017 peak for Bitcoin and we go into a multi-year bear market and we finally break out into our all-time high, we'll go ahead and mark this time period right in here. Bitcoin goes off and really starts taking off into its all-time high right over here, right around December 15th, 2020. I know it's a couple of days off of that, but mid-December is when it takes off. If we go look at the Dow Jones Industrial Average to say, hey, when do we get through here? We could see that we start peaking through the all-time high right here from our C19 sell-off, breaking through new all-time highs right back here in November and December. So within 4 or 5 weeks of the Dow Jones breaking out into its new all-time high, Bitcoin is able to break out into its new all-time high as well. So, okay, is it a mere coincidence that those things happened right in there? Let's go back and look at the past bull run as well. We could see that Bitcoin was going off into this bull run right in here, but then it paused out. If we take a look at the Dow Jones from this time period right in here, we could see the Dow actually went ranging during that whole time period as well. And then if we look at Bitcoin to see when it broke out into its new all-time high and when the Dow Jones broke out into its new all-time high, we could see right here, November of 2016 is when the Dow Jones starts breaking out into its all-time high. Bitcoin is able to poke the all-time high for the first time about 6 weeks later. Then as the Dow Jones really gets going, so does Bitcoin at the same time. So we have another period here where we see a big bull run happening in the Dow Jones after years of consolidation. Mere weeks after breaking out into all-time high, Bitcoin also goes along with it at the same time. Then, like we just saw a moment ago, Bitcoin pauses as the Dow Jones pauses. But can we go back even more and look at it here? One thing to notice over here is we look at the Great Financial Crisis from right back here, or at least the start of the Great Financial Crisis taking place in October of 2007, and the peak that took place in here. We'll go ahead and put a line on when we were able to actually break out of that moment right in there. Look over here to Bitcoin and see that Bitcoin actually broke out of its all-time high within the weeks of the exact same time. You can see the breakout beginning right here for the Dow Jones Industrial Average. We're going for it, breaks out and keeps going for it. And then what happens? Pause, and what? Let's go again and keep going. So we see that it took getting through the Great Financial Crisis for a bull run to emerge with a breakout into a new all-time high. We see over here a breakout into a new all-time high after years of consolidating, sends Bitcoin on another bull run. And then we see years of consolidating, breaking out into a new all-time high, sends Bitcoin into a new all-time high as well. So all three of the past major bull runs for Bitcoin taking place in 2013, 2016, and 17, in 2020 and 21, all occurred within weeks after the Dow Jones spent years ranging and breaking into new all-time highs. In 2013, Bitcoin started cranking once the Dow broke above great financial crisis levels, 2016 after it broke from its multi-year range, into the 2017 parabolic run in the Dow, and then in 2020 once we got through the C19 height. There's a very clear correlation of within 6 weeks of the Dow Jones breaking out into new all-time highs, Bitcoin breaks out into all-time highs after being in a bear market for several years. It's just clear as day on the charts. So the question comes, does the Dow Jones go off and to set new all-time highs? And if it doesn't go off and to set new all-time highs, what does that mean for Bitcoin? And let's be clear, right? Everybody can make their own decision. If you think the Dow Jones is going to go break off into new all-time highs and the stock market's never going to go down and it's up only, then that probably means up only for Bitcoin. But if you do think the top of the stock market is in, if you do think we've reached the end of the bubble, then what is your thought process about Bitcoin? And so that's a challenge we're all having to kind of come to terms with right now. But some, I get it. Some people think, no, that doesn't matter. It's the block reward halving. The whole point of doing this exercise right here is to show that it seems that within 6 weeks of the Dow Jones breaking into a new all-time high is when Bitcoin breaks into its new all-time high. That doesn't seem to have anything to do with a block reward halving to me. That seems to have to do with the stock market to me. So can the stock market break into new all-time highs? And if not, what does it mean for Bitcoin? And I've been working on this video all morning, and I decided to finally, let's just put it out to the public and see what people think out here right now. And I have 2 questions that I phrased here on Twitter. They've only been running for a few minutes. We can kind of get some initial data coming out in here of the first 2,248 votes here. Will Bitcoin set a new all-time high within the next 5 years? And 73.6% of people say yes, and 26.4% of people say no. And so this is people who follow me, most likely the first initial respondents. So you guys, you hear me say that, what are my thoughts on Bitcoin, that, I have serious doubts that Bitcoin could set a new all-time high, but you still choose to listen to me, or you disagree with me and you hear me out anyway. But that's real interesting for me to understand that about you guys who watch my channel, right? 73.6 believe that we will still set new all-time highs. But when we ask this question, will the US stock market set a new all-time high within the next 5 years? Only 44.9% of people believe we will set a new all-time high. So we can see that 73.6% of people think Bitcoin will set a new all-time high, but only 44.9% of people think the US stock market will set a new all-time high. The way I view the stock market, it's popped. The good news is they don't usually go down in straight lines, and this is a really confluent zone for where a bounce can come in. Whether it's already started, whether it's got to go down another 2,000, 3,000 points before a bounce can actually come in. It's confluent for where bounces happen, but it doesn't mean that it will set a new all-time high. We have gone beyond parabolic levels and broken through levels that historically indicate in this structure, the bubble has popped. So I don't think the Dow Jones is going to set a new all-time high. This is how bull markets come to an end, especially this 100-year-long bull market happening here in the Dow, that when you get your waves like this, this is how the ending happens in here. And that we've reached that moment. And if I just use logic and I say, if the top is in for the Dow Jones, then Bitcoin's not going to set a new all-time high. That is not being a fudster. That is not being opinionated. That is using mere rules. If you use rules and you say Bitcoin breaks out into new all-time highs when Dow Jones breaks out into new all-time highs, then if Dow Jones does not break out into new all-time highs, then Bitcoin does not break out into new all-time highs. So if Dow Jones breaks out into new all-time highs, then Bitcoin breaks out into new all-time highs. Very simple if-then statements. If Dow Jones does not break out into new all-time highs, then Bitcoin does not break out into new all-time highs. But that's where you get into the theoretical debate within the cryptocurrency community of whether or not it is dependent on the Dow Jones or if it's dependent on the Bitcoin block reward halvings. And what we can't see from the data from Bitcoin is whether or not the actual block reward halvings are the reasons why Bitcoin does break out, or if it actually is the Dow Jones. Because what happens to occur here is these breakouts are timed 4 years apart that are happening here in the Dow. Each time these major breakouts are happening, they're happening 4 years apart. So we just so happen to have the Bitcoin block reward halving every 4 years. But at the same time, these breakouts are happening 4 years apart on the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And so it's as we move out into these new levels, these things are happening here for Bitcoin, but these things also happen to be 4 years apart on the Dow. So huge theoretical debate. Who's right? Who's wrong? I go with the idea that it's based on the Dow. So I'll leave that up to everyone else to decide. But I say to myself, so what would happen, right? Let's pretend that this thing plays out in the manner that we're discussing right here. Let's say that a bounce comes in this region, whether we have it or not, whether it's got to go lower, right? If a bounce comes out in this region and this thing happens to occur like what bubble pops do before they plunge down in here, what happens in the market in here? I would think we would get a Bitcoin retracement, and we would get a retracement in the Dow Jones Industrial Average. But this also, based on other past market cycles that we've watched in the cryptocurrency market, would be positive for other aspects of the market. So just because Bitcoin doesn't set a new all-time high doesn't mean Ethereum doesn't set a new all-time high, or XRP or Cardano or Atom, Cosmos, whatever. It doesn't matter. It doesn't put the same constrictions on other assets in the market that they can't set new all-time highs. Doesn't mean they will. We don't know. We're going to have to wait till we get to that moment. But it also could explain why Bitcoin's had no retracement whatsoever since the top has come in, as the Dow Jones has just been moving down and down and down. We haven't had a retracement come in for Bitcoin. And this might have been the thing holding us back, is that we are just so ridiculously following the stock market. So what is my best guess? Eventually, we're going to find a bottom here for the Dow Jones. Whether it's right here, right now, we've already hit it, we're done, or it has to close any of these gaps down in here. But eventually, we will start bouncing in here. But due to how deep we have gone in here, I do not believe we will set a new all-time high. Due to us not setting a new all-time high, regardless of a Fed pivot. If a Fed pivot comes out and they knock 2 points off of 200 basis points off, 300 basis points off, doesn't matter. Due to the technical damage done to the chart, I do not believe we will set a new all-time high. Due to us not setting a new all-time high here for the Dow Jones, I do not believe we will set a new all-time high for Bitcoin. I do believe we will see a bounce. And I do believe we will visit retracement levels. Wherever that bottom bounce may end up being, it seems likely we will come back into these prices at some point for the Dow around 34,000. But unlikely that we're going to be setting a new all-time high. Due to the unlikely nature that we're going to be setting a new all-time high for the Dow Jones, it seems unlikely that Bitcoin will set a new all-time high. Unless if magical unicorn dust exists and we do just rampage due to the block reward halving. The only problem with that is that there's too much timing evidence of Bitcoin breaking into new all-time highs when the Dow Jones does. If we had inconsistencies of, say, 6 months later, 8 months before, or a year spacing them out, or 4 months spacing them out, we could say, there's enough of an anomaly to say there's no relevance there. But due to them always happening within weeks of each other, that Bitcoin's multi-year bear markets break out into new all-time highs within weeks of the Dow Jones breaking out into pivotal new all-time highs, there seems to be way too much correlation between the two. And since it doesn't seem likely that this will, it doesn't seem likely that Bitcoin will, but that a retracement will come in here at some point for the Dow Jones, and one will come in for Bitcoin. The big question then remains, well, what about the rest of the cryptocurrency market? We know the conditions for Bitcoin to set a new all-time high, at least the last 3 major ones, 2013, 17, and 21. Were the Dow Jones breaking out into new all-time highs. However, for the rest of the cryptocurrency market, the conditions are a little bit different. They're more focused on what Bitcoin is actually doing. And the conditions for the rest of the cryptocurrency market to take off are dependent on 2 different scenarios. One of them being Bitcoin breaking out into new all-time highs, or Bitcoin topping and retracing. We obviously know no retracement has come in. It's been pretty much this mystical thing that blockchain backer talks about, but has never appeared for an entire year. But we haven't had one. So the big question will remain for the rest of the market, what happens to it if the Dow retraces and Bitcoin retraces? Does that meet the conditional requirement for the rest of the cryptocurrency market? And that's where I've placed my eggs in a basket at. I have mentioned that I have accumulated Bitcoin down here at these lows, but 90% of my cryptocurrency portfolio is the altcoin market. It's not because I hate Bitcoin or I think Bitcoin doesn't have a place in society. I've been around the block long enough in this market for over 5 years to know that Bitcoin plays a very vital role in the market. But I also am in this camp right here with 53.2% of people who think that the stock market will not set a new all-time high. And simply because I see what has happened with the Dow Jones and with Bitcoin and the timing of them being weeks apart, that's the conclusion I have to jump to. And it's interesting now that a little bit more time has passed. We've got a few thousand votes on these things. 73.2% of people do believe Bitcoin will set a new all-time high, while only 46.8% of people believe the stock market will set a new all-time high. So it doesn't matter what I think. I think the interesting thing about all of this is for people to just kind of think about this data. I think it was probably a little bit of a wake up to see how close the Dow breaking out into new all-time highs and Bitcoin breaking out into new all-time highs are, and the conflicts of our own personal beliefs and what we think is going to happen in the market when, 53% of people do not think the stock market's going to set a new all-time high, but it's guaranteed some of those people are in this basket right down in here and thinking that Bitcoin will. But the data is otherwise. That goes to show a lot of us are probably in that camp of the block reward halving, right? And so it's up to everybody to kind of decide which one is it. Is it the block reward halving or is it the stock market? And, I just, make my public thoughts known that I do think it's due to the stock market, but time will tell. And that's just kind of the way my mind is working here moving forward. So this video has gotten long. It's gotten very late. This one has taken me a long time to put together for some reason today to get my thoughts down properly. But really the main point of it all was to show that there's a big strife out there in the cryptocurrency market on people believing the stock market has topped versus not topped, and Bitcoin setting new all-time highs versus not setting new all-time highs. And I really wanted to show how I formulate my opinion, which we'll see if it's right or wrong someday, and how it's based off the data of historical new all-time highs for Bitcoin. And Bitcoin's new all-time highs have all come in at pivotal times on the stock market setting new all-time highs. Whether that was the big breakout in 2017 for the Dow Jones, or the breakout above the great financial crisis in 2013, or the breakout from the C19 highs in 2020. Those time periods all marked the end of Bitcoin bear markets. And that has been how every new all-time high has been set for Bitcoin. So, block reward halving or stock market, the biggest controversy in crypto. All right, guys, that's going to be it for this one. So it's already late in the afternoon, you guys. So I hope you guys are doing well. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. I'm going to wrap this thing up. I want to thank you so much for watching. If you could, please like this video and give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you could be notified of when I create new content and when I go live. As always, this is not investment advice, and I am not a financial advisor. But if you ever need a pick-me-up or a little bit of reassurance, just remember that the blockchain backers got your back. Have a good one.